Okay, well, I'm Tom Russell. I'm third year in an arts degree. My colours are black and white, and my slogan is "Rustle some feathers."
Cool. Thanks.
Oh, and I'm 20 years old.
Okay, so Tom, are you a member of or aligned with any political party?
Yes, I'm a member of the Young Liberals. I'm a member of the Liberal Society. I don't want to sort of sound like, Albert Speer at Nuremberg as if it's something to be ashamed of being a member of the Liberal Party, but I'm not an overly active member. I try to keep up with, I'm a proud member of the Liberal Party, but I'm not a big sort of party hack, and that's honest.
Okay, so I guess first of all I wanted to ask, one of your policies is that you want to end AA.
That's correct.
So why are you opposed to AA?
Okay,
Well, first of all, affirmative action.
Yeah, okay, well, so basically, the principle that I've always worked with is, and it comes straight from a great sort of political thinker and economist called Friedrich Hayek. He said that there is all the difference in the world between treating people equally and attempting to make them equal. I think that it's just the thing about AA is that it's such an act of elitism on the part of the political classes, the student political classes, imposing these kind of top-down plans because they have an insufficient trust in the voting population to actually to trust them not to inject the kind of personal biases against women or gays or whoever into the sort of their thinking. It just strikes me as such an act of elitism. I don't think it's necessary. Secondly, I think that inner Sydney is arguably one of the real sort of progressive heartlands of Australia. Alongside sort of inner city Melbourne, it's arguably the progressive hotbed of Australia. And indeed, we're at a university almost notorious for its sort of liberal progressive sort of politics. And yet, at the same time, we have a quota which is fully 50%. And it's one of the most extreme quotas you can possibly apply without sort of venturing into the realm of the ludicrous. And it's just so out of step, the notion of a 50% quota in a university itself located in one of the progressive heartlands of Australia. So there's that. I don't think it works. I think that I just think that so for one, it doesn't work. And two, it's the principle of the thing. It's this act of elitism on behalf of the student political classes, who couch it in these sort of flowery terms of it's structural, or it's the patriarchy, or it's this or that. And the reality is that it's just weasel words attempting to dodge the fact that what they are accusing each individual member of the union of is misogyny and sexism and an inability to be sufficiently equal-minded in their treatment of candidates such that a full 50% quota needs to be applied. I just think that's just utterly demeaning on the individual members of the society. And it's couched in this language that creates manyest victims but fewest perpetrators, when the reality is it's accusing each individual member, but it's using these words that means that they can avoid pointing to each individual person who they're accusing this of, who are the real people that this is effectively designed to combat. Those prejudices, assumed prejudices of those real people who they're using these policies, these top-down policies to combat. Treat people equally, but don't try to make them equal. Don't try to make them equal. That's my plea.
So how do you respond to the fact then that other inner Sydney universities, so very similar climates, very similar situations, like UTS, like UNSW, that don't have affirmative action measures, have almost all male boards? It
just seems to me that it's almost like something's failed. There's this perception that something's failed when you see an all-male board. I look to the facts of Sydney University itself. We've had, prior to David Pink, we had 3 SRC presidents in a row, all female. Last year we elected to the board more women than were necessary to fill the quota. The purpose of affirmative action is to eliminate the need for its own existence. It's like welfare in that sense. Welfare isn't there to make people comfortable. It's there to actually, if at all possible, drive them out of their condition. And this is the same with AA. And yet, in 2012, in the progressive heartland of Australia, in a university, we still have this 50% quota. It's just so archaic. And above all, just something that is designed to combat a perceived failure, which I don't think's really that, it's not this bogeyman that people are making out.
So on the point then of women, how do you feel, what's your view on autonomous safe spaces like the women's room and the queer space?
Look, autonomous spaces I have no real objection to. I think that I'm a big believer in voluntarism. If people want to voluntarily associate to exclude certain people from a certain space, I have no objection to it. I fully understand that the kind of things that women are discussing in these kind of in these spaces aren't necessarily things that they want to include men in. I have every sympathy for men who are big feminists themselves who want to be sort of included in these conversations. But I think that it's fair that just a small sort of part of just a small area where women can know that it's only women and it's somewhere where it's a safe space. I have no real objection to it.
Okay. So to take just another direction then off those sort of social policies, what is your opinion on how the USU has handled the staff strike this semester?
Well, I think that it to the best of my knowledge, the USU simply sort of tried to sort of get on as normal. I think there was some uproar when it was outed that the CEO of the union, Andrew Woodward, had sent around a memorandum to staff making it clear making measures clear whereby they could avoid the strikes. I think that it was handled appropriately. I think that the union isn't an explicitly political body. I think that if this is going to be the preserve of a political body, I think it's more the SRC's role, and the union is there to sort of serve its members. And I think in that sense it handled it appropriately. Nihil obstat.
Okay, so just on that, just quickly, you mentioned in your sort of policy statement that the candidates are largely indistinguishable when they've got colours and slogans and they're all promising cheaper food and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So if the union is largely a business where these kinds of policies like cheaper food or these kinds of events are important, why does it matter? Why was it an eye-opener when you found out what political parties they're aligned with?
Well, I think that
why should politics matter?
This is exactly the course I'm trying to chart. I think that it's quite important to draw this distinction between, bread and circus's policy, the policies of the people that we've had running for union in the past, and on the other hand, the kind of the mad dog kind of ideologues that we've seen all too many of in student politics. I'm trying to sort of chart almost a middle course there. I think that when we say that the union is a business in the business of serving its members, and I think that they're not necessarily served best by self-serving kind of student politicians who are simply just trotting out the same bread and circuses policies year on year. You point to these kind of policies that they put up. I challenge anyone, any member of the union that I go up to, anyone, to name me 2 policies that a board member who had been elected the previous year had run on. And for bonus points, I'd ask them 2 policies that actually they can identify that were fulfilled. And I think that would be the real challenge. I doubt that anyone could even name me 2 policies that were proposed, let alone 2 policies that were actually ended up being fulfilled.
I could, but
I'm sure you could. I'm absolutely sure you could. But the kind of people I'm referring to are the people who aren't necessarily in that kind of inner sanctum of union politics. It just seems to me that there's a perception that candidates overpromise, and it's not just that they overpromise. They both, on the one hand, promise just the most inane bullshit, and then on the other hand, it doesn't even happen. It's the most amazing thing to me that they can't even make happen just the most inane nonsense that gets put up every year on year on year on year on year.
Okay, so what are your main policy?
Okay, well, I mean, I'm trying to stick to what can actually, what is the realm of the possible, and if I have a policy that's a bit more speculative, a bit more from left of field, I'm going to be upfront about it. I'm going to tell people that what are the reasonable what are the chances of this succeeding? What are some alternate ways of, of making it happen? And if they can't be done, I want to be honest with them. I want to be honest with voters and tell people what are the actual chances of these things getting up. So, for instance, with AA, I know that I'm unlikely to get it past the current board. I've no doubt that it would be rejected, possibly with me as the sole, with myself as the sole vote for. I mean, even the kind of the establishment conservatives that have run in past years have just simply nodded their heads and waved it through. I remember Nick Kaufman in the same position last year, when asked about AA, just nodded his head and, yeah, it's fair. And that was the moment when I lost faith altogether in conservative sort of student union politics. It just seems to me that, we should try as hard as possible to be honest with people about the chances of this. And if we have, a left-of-field policy, we should be ready to propose alternate means of making it happen. So if I can't get the AA policy passed board, I'll take it to a general meeting, and I'll gather 200 signatures, which you need to call a general meeting, and I'll attempt to gain the numbers necessary to force a change to the Constitution by direct vote.
Okay. Is abolishing AA your only policy?
No, not at all. It's
what else have you got? What else? If
okay, yeah.
You get elected,
cultural. Okay.
What would you do?
Okay. Well, one really cheap thing is to change the way the union approaches approaches its cultural events. So, I mean, one recent example has been the kind of the flap over the Indigenous festival. I think there was a substantial controversy over the conduct of the Indigenous festival and its ongoing. I think the board meeting yesterday, discussed it. Last Friday, discussed it at some length. I just think that the way the union needs to approach cultural events is something it just feels more. It's a way to make these things feel more real. I mean, I remember going through sort of K-12 schooling, learning about Aboriginal history, and I just remember the groan that went up whenever the teacher would announce that, today we're going to be starting on Aboriginal history or Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal whatever, and it was so disappointing because, I've got 2 Aboriginal step-cousins. 2 of my uncles have all their lives been involved in sort of Aboriginal sort of organising and sort of government interaction. Another one lives up north where there's in a town with a half Aboriginal population, and I learned more from these people in 5 minutes of conversation about real Aboriginal culture than I did in K-12 black armband sort of schooling. And I just think that it's unfortunate that the union has brought the same kind of attitude towards Aboriginal culture into the way it conducts its own sort of cultural outreach. It just has such an air of unreality to it. I mean, Aboriginals, they were real people, and they were real, they were just real people like us, and they were who fought wars between each other, who could exhibit the most horrendous barbarism, who mistreated women, who possibly caused one of the major extinction events in the Australian context. It's just trying to make these things feel more real and feel more relevant.
And how would that happen?
Well, I'd love, as part of Indigenous Week, I'd love a series of a lecture on Aboriginal language. Aboriginal language is one of the most fascinating topics I've ever come across in all my language studies. I study 3 languages. And Aboriginal, and I remember just studying, just even looking at the Wikipedia page for the Tiwi language. It just blew my mind. It was amazing. Just the complexity and sophistication of the morphological structure of this language blew me away. It did more for my respect for Aboriginal people than K-12 schooling did.
So lectures during Indigenous Week.
Yeah, so lectures during Indigenous Week. Lectures on how the use of fire in in how the use of fire in hunting possibly caused a major change in the ecosystem, wiping out the megafauna. Lectures in intertribal sort of Aboriginal warfare, territorial changes.
Okay, so you're basically going for an information approach with Indigenous Week, but what else?
Okay, well, it feeds into the whole to the way the union approaches its cultural events. You know, one of the most enjoyable parts of the union is going to all these sort of events that they arrange. I remember last year in Interfaith Week, there was some great events. There was a panel where we had David Clark, Lee Rhiannon, and Luke Foley on the same panel, among others. There was a panel where we had various members from the Jewish, Catholic, evangelical, and atheist sort of societies all talking together. There was a panel on same-sex marriage, and they went off. They were great fun, right? And I'd love to see that both expanded in Interfaith Week and expanded across the other sort of areas of USU sort of cultural program, just to sort of make its cultural outreach just feel more real, more interesting, more relevant, less of this just PC nonsense. I mean, that would be the way I would envision the way the union should conduct itself in all its cultural outreach programs, which is a big part of what the union does and how the union makes the student experience enjoyable.
Great. So expansion of cultural programs.
Yeah, just and it's free. It doesn't take any money. It's for all intents.
Putting on a bunch of lectures doesn't take any money.
Well, it is for all. It would just be there are already events for Aboriginal Week. I would simply be funding using the same funding to fund better, more enjoyable, more interesting, more relevant, more real kind of events. And it doesn't cost any money. It just takes a change in approach, and that's the kind of change that I want to sort of bring to the union.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess my next question then would be, I'm going to go ahead and assume here, just written in your policy statement, that you oppose SSAF.
I do oppose the SSAF.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
That's one sentence answer. The next thing I wanted to ask then is what part of the union would take that $3 million hit if SSAF was to be taken away?
Okay, well, SSAF, the first thing to realise is that, for a start, we survive without SSAF, right? It almost reminds me of during the sequestration debate in the United States. All the politicians are running around like headless chickens talking about how the sky was going to fall once sequestration hit. Sequestration rolled back the level of federal funding from the state it was now to the state it was 2 years ago, right? And the US government survived in 2010. The union can survive post-SSAF.
But the union was going under and was surviving on generous donations from the university.
Yes.
We were getting that money from the university, which is unlikely to happen if SSAF is abolished, because the university itself is facing pitfalls too.
Yeah, but the union was sort of becoming insolvent for reasons unrelated to cash flows and unrelated to the money coming in. I think that the focus shouldn't be how do we squeeze more money out of students. The focus has to be how do we do more with less. And how do we cut things that aren't necessary?
So what's unnecessary?
Well, for a start, I think we need to reimagine the investment portfolio. I mean, I think that at the moment, I think me and Nada actually mentioned that last year that one of his biggest regrets was not taking on certain risky investments, which in hindsight would have paid off. And I think that the union needs to be more conscious of where better investment options are. And I'd love to sort of take that approach to them of a more creative investment portfolio. I'd also sort of like to basically look at the areas that actually talk to people and ask them, do you need more money or have you got enough? For instance, within the clubs and societies, I recall that when I was an executive on the Gaius Gracchus Society of Classics and History for some time. And we had a reasonably sort of robust events schedule. We had a few toga parties, film screenings, various other things, and we didn't even get close to our funding cap. And yet this is what the union is budgeting for. I think that we really need to take a more creative approach to CNS funding. I think if you ask the CNS what they'd rather from more funding, which most of them are flush with already. And I'd be happy to take advice from anyone who's any member of an executive of a club or society who is the opposite end of the spectrum, actually needs more money. I'm happy to talk to people about that. But in my experience, the Clubs and Societies program is quite well endowed at the moment. I don't foresee the need for any expansion of funding in that area. And I think that if you ask them what they'd rather things like cuts in the level of bureaucracy they have to go through to actually start one up and manage it. These kind of things. I think Josh Crawford has a great sort of line about has a great sort of approach to that. And I won't steal his thunder or anything, but I think that's his policy. And if that's something you're interested in, I'd advise you check him out.
So on that point of clubs and societies, your experience in that area in the candidate book is absolutely empty. What makes you think that you know enough about clubs and societies to make informed decisions about how they should operate if you're elected?
I left it empty purely because I was doing it like bashing it out in the last 15 minutes. Which
do you have any experience in clubs and societies?
Yes, as I said, I was executive on the Gaius Gracchus Classics in History. I'm a executive at the Catholic Society. I'm quite heavily involved in Life Choice.
The Catholic Society is not union affiliated, is that right?
Yeah, it is. CSSB, Catholic Society St. Peter.
Okay.
But this is the thing, I'm happy to take advice. I'm happy to admit that I'm not the most experienced club executive. I know that some of the other candidates have these stacked sort of resumes of VP, exec, president, blah, 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 blah. I'm happy to take advice. I'm happy to take advice from anyone who has anything to tell me about what they need more of, what they need less of, what they're happy to go without, what they need. I'm happy to take all that kind of advice. I'm not going to be someone who just sort of sits in the top office of home and sits in the top office of the home building and just more or less ignores the actual day-to-day operation of the union. I like to think that you can gain just as much knowledge from asking, from just spending 10 minutes asking 10 different club executives about the operations of their club than you can from just spending a whole year in which you might go to one or two meetings as a club executive on a certain society.
So just speaking of what you said before about your involvement with Life Choice and the Catholic Society, do you think religious ideology should have a role in the governance of the USU?
No, and I don't think it does. As far as I'm aware, the religion has no influence in running the union, and I don't plan to introduce it. I just see it as just a massive non-issue, really.
Just quickly, just going back to the CNS funding thing.
Yep.
Do you think it's fair then? Like you obviously, you've acknowledged that there are some clubs and societies that do need more funding.
Yeah.
Do you think it's fair to say to a certain club, hey, like you guys don't do much, you can have $1,000 a year, you guys do a lot, why don't you have 8 or 9? Do you think that's fair?
Well, it seems to me that the way they work it out at the moment is a bit sort of uncreative. It's based on cut-offs for, what is it, like 100. I know that there's a certain cut-offs for above a certain number of members.
The default is that everyone, like unless you're on probation, every club or society gets 4,000, and you can apply for up to 8,000 with all those criteria. Like
it just seems to me that just we need to be more creative in the way we fund clubs and societies. I'm not going to be going in into certain clubs and societies and demanding they make do with less than they need. That wouldn't be serving members' interests. Right? It would just be dumb. Right? I have absolutely no plans of doing that. I actually plan to be talking to people and asking them what they need, what they can go without, And even with the kind of the programs that most clubs and societies have at the moment, I think you find most members are there. The kind of the drinks nights and the events that they put on. I think that they'd be quite satisfactory. And if they're not satisfied, then that's something that. And then if they're not satisfied and there's not enough funding in the cap to satisfy them, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to talk these things over with the union board. I mean, it just seems to me that it's all done through kind of the forms and numbers and tick boxes, and it just talk to people.
Okay, so now just going back to the board and the elections.
Yeah.
Which other candidates do you support?
Well, I mean, I've had a look through, and I'm impressed with Josh Crawford. I'm impressed with William Dawes. I'm impressed with Kanika. Who else? I mean, ironically, like one of the people I'm impressed with the greatest to a greater degree than most is Bibi D'Souza. And just I look at her policy statement and I just think, what the hell are you doing? But at least she's nailing her colours to the mast. I mean, I look in the candidate policy statements and I see just the blandest, the most meaningless, just word soup of just politispeak I've ever seen. You know, it just strikes me that some of these people are literally, what is wrong with student politics? You know, and I honestly admire someone who's actually willing to nail their colours to the mast and actually present a real platform for people to vote on. I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell between most of the others. And I think that once they get their different colours on and their stupid slogans and, you know, and sort of wheel out these bread and circuses policies, it'll just all sort of blur together and just this haze of bread and circuses.
Okay. If you're elected, who will you vote for president of the board?
I think out of who are the two front runners are John Harding-Eason and God, who's the other one?
Probably Hannah Morris, or there's also who are the other five that are up there now? Tom Rowley, Karen Chow, Sophie Stanton.
Look, honestly, I'd vote for John Harding-Eason. I mean, seems like a nice guy. Seems reasonable enough. You know, not a sort of a mad ideologue. He's a nice guy. I think he'd be good to work with. Yeah.
And when do you think it's appropriate for board meetings to go in camera?
Well, I mean, I think
it's important that the board is transparent.
I honestly don't think that there should be any in-camera provisions at all. It just seems to me, why? It's just present a decent reason to me, and I'll think about it. But I just don't see any reason at the moment why board meetings need to be in camera. What actually needs to be discussed that is somehow so sensitive that people can't sit in on it. It's not the CIA. You know, it's not the, you know, Joint Chiefs of Staff, is it? I don't see any reason why it should be in camera. No reason at all.
One of the last questions I have, just going back to your policies. So
yep.
The expansion of cultural programs is not listed in your policy statement.
No.
Is that something you will be running on?
Yes, it will be. I mean, I only had 200 words, and I was kind of bashing this out at sort of 3 a.m. in the morning. No, it's not listed there, but it's something I've always seen in the union. I've always seen as somewhat defective, the way they approach the kind of cultural language. And yes, it will be something I'll be running on.
Mm-hmm. And just so on that, so then your application was then obviously quite last minute.
Yeah.
Is that because you hadn't even thought about running for board, or is it something you've always wanted to do?
I've been thinking about running for board for months and months. I'm a lazy bastard, basically. You know, and just sort of, you know, just bashing it down to the last few. It's you know, you know, me and my campaign manager Nick Richardson have been mulling over this in, you know, parties that we were at sort of in the summer holidays. You know, it's not something that I suddenly, you know, woke up one morning, you know, a day before the submission and said, I should run for it. No, this is really something I've been ambitious to do, and indeed I ran for SRC last year, and this is something which was the next thing that I wanted to give a shot at.
And did you apply for the $500 grant?
I did apply for the $500 grant, yes.
And was that like a help in your decision to run?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, I think that it's kind of just reduces the main barrier. It's the main barrier is always time and time and cost. And I think that if whatever you can do to reduce the barriers to people, and I think it encourages people who don't ordinarily get involved in student politics to run as well. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I think it's a good thing. And yeah, so yeah, that helped me out.
I guess, I don't know about you, but I've probably got the last question I wanted to ask you was just going back to the SSAF stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware, but it's sort of a contractual obligation of the board to support CSU, to support compulsory student unionism, because it's a major cash flow for the union.
Right.
Will that be a problem for you as someone who is opposed to SSAF?
I seem to remember at some point that board members were censored from talking about VSU, CSU during the original debate. Is that still ongoing?
Yeah, like it's essentially if you're elected to board,
right.
It's your contractual obligation to support it publicly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll abide by any contractual arrangements the union wants to throw at me. I mean, I will indeed fight for the removal of these clauses in the contractual arrangement because privately I'm obviously a supporter of VSU. I think that, I think that, but I will do, I'm a contract libertarian. I will do what the contract requires me to do and no more. But at the same time, there's no reason why you can't try to change the contract. And I will try to do that. I have no idea how I would. I'm happy to take advice, but I will try to get it done.
And so on that, come September, it's quite likely there will be...
There will, yes.
And therefore also quite likely that SSAF could indeed be abolished.
Yes.
The USU is likely then, based on their contracts and their position, is likely to vehemently oppose that and will fight against that.
Yes, and I will...
And what will you do?
I will not. I think what we need... The union is not an explicitly political sort of body, but at the same time it does have a stake in SSAF. And we need people all over the country when there's a change in government, and at this stage it's not if but when. So when there's a change in government, we need people we need interested parties all over the country who are essentially begging the Prime Minister, saying we don't need this money. I mean, we don't need it. We don't want it. It's something that, one, we can do without, and two, is just the most arrant hypocrisy from the left. I mean, it's amazing. The Gillard government is cutting, $2.3 billion from education over 6 years. There's over 1 million students in Australia, so it works out at sort of $333 per year per student that the Gillard government is cutting for education. And we're having national days of fucking action for this on May 15th. And of course, no protest whatsoever. And indeed, support for $280 per student per year on the SSAF as a matter of compulsion. Right? Just give us the money. It's just the most utter hypocrisy. Just this idea that just any cuts to tertiary education, no way, no truck, no deal, nothing. No cuts, nothing. And at the same time, $280 per student per year, wave it through. That's fine. We support that. And you know why it is? You know what? It's because it goes directly to institutions the left controls. And if you want to break some of that control, vote for me. That's basically my pitch to voters. And so we need people all over the country, because the government's going to receive a flood, an absolute fucking tsunami from all over the country, for people who are going to be writing in, begging them, pleading with them, just extolling them not to cut the SSAF, because it's institutions the left control, and they do not give up their money lightly.
But you just said the union was not political.
Yeah, but this is the thing, right? Not political. It shouldn't be, right? We shouldn't be a den of sort of political ideologues. And I think that honestly the most well-meaning people will allow it to be. At the same time, we don't want it to be unprincipled. And when we run it according to certain principles, we don't want it to be bred into this unprincipled organisation. That's the path I'm trying to chart. And I think that my opposition to SSAF fits in perfectly with that. And we need, because the voices you listen to, right, isn't the tsunami, right? Tony Abbott's going to be listening to the voices of dissent. And we need people all over the country who are telling him, we don't need this money. Those are the people he's going to listen to. And if you want your voice heard, because you're opposed to SSAF, if you want that voice heard, then vote for me. That's all I have to say. Because you're not going to get a voice any other way through student politics. It's amazing. The SSAF is twice again yearly access fees. It's $280 and yearly access fees are now $90, having been brought down from $110 or something. So can you ask any student on the street, anyone, and ask them to point towards twice again the value received, because they're paying twice again into student services in the form of SSAF, so a full 3 parts in 4 of the money they pay to student services are in the SSAF. If you can ask them, if you ask them, can you identify fully 3 times again money received, value received from student services after the passing of the SSAF, then sure, don't vote for me. Don't vote for me. But if you honestly look at the value you've got out of student services, and you can't identify 3 times again, 3 parts in 4, money, three times the value received from student services that you've already paid into it, don't vote. Vote for me. That's my appeal. That's my appeal. People will honestly look at this. Just look at the ledger. Just look at the ledger. All right. Value received, value put in. Value received, value put in. That's all I ask you. That's all I ask people to look at. And if they can't identify value received from the SSAF, please vote for me.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like quite an inherently political position to me.
But it's a principled one. It's not. I'm not a mad ideologue. All I want is just people to get their fucking money's worth. I'm not. Fuck. I'm not trying to be, the Tom Rao of the right. All right. It's not what I want to be. I don't want to be like the mad dog of Merryweather. It's not my role. All right. But at the same time, I want to actually have a certain set of principles. One of those principles should be you should get out of unions what you put into. You should get out of student services what you put in.
So one of your policies is value for money.
Value for money.